I did what my mom told me to do and got revenge. Disclaimer: this tale is not intended to demean single moms or individuals suffering from mental illnesses, and although I adore my mother, it is a story of how things may come back to bite you. So here's the backstory. My parents split while I was in kindergarten, so I was no older than 6. My mother was granted exclusive custody of us. Despite the fact that she suffered from mental illness, I believe she has borderline personality disorder, and she was also a typical narcissistic parent. Anyway, ever since the divorce, Mom has always told us that it was not her fault that we didn't have enough money for stuff and that we should blame my father. For example, if there was nothing to eat for breakfast and we moaned like young children, she yelled, "It's your father's fault, so weep to him." I just learned never to complain or go without, and I spent my youth caring for her. My sister and I were taught to come home from school, complete our schoolwork, clean the house, and take care of ourselves from the time I was approximately 8. My sister was 10. Don't ask Mom to prepare supper. Instead, make it yourself and do all of the tasks so Mom doesn't have to. It may seem strange, but we thought it was usual to be struck and told on a regular basis that we were useless. My final year of high school was the worst. My grandmother died a few months before that summer, and my mother quit her work and spent the money my grandmother left her before the summer was finished. This was close to $75K back in 2000. She refused to seek another job and continued making excuses not to work, e.g., "I need a break, get off my back, I broke my leg," and so on, while she went out drinking with her buddy and behaved like a carefree teenager. So I spent my senior year working hard in school and my after-school part-time job, and basically taking care of an overgrown kid who refused to work or help out. When a utility went out or there was no food in the home, she only grumbled, "You have a job. How come you can't pay?" If I mentioned that my father had provided her child support, she would just moan about having my sister's tuition, which I later learned was BS. She'd show off her child support check, giggle, and refer to it as "mommy's paycheck." Now fast forward to when I'm going to pick a college and my mother is whining about the prices and, of course, has nothing saved in a college fund. I couldn't afford a private institution, since I was only awarded a half scholarship, so I chose a more affordable but nonetheless well-recognized public university. My freshman year, I was able to cover the cost of tuition and room and board. I lived on campus, since I submitted my taxes in FAFSA as soon as my W-2s arrived, so I had a reasonable number of grants. During my first year of college, I was on the verge of being unable to acquire financial help for my second year. Why? My W-2s were sent to my home address, and my mother, ever the kind and supporting mother, destroyed them and tossed them away. My sister was home that weekend and witnessed it, so I found out. My mother denied it, and when I asked her about them, when I returned home for spring break, she lied and stated her friend had them. Her friend was a CPA's. My sister phoned the acquaintance who stated she didn't have any of our tax information to call my mom out on her bluff. She was worried and instructed me and my sister to acquire duplicate W-2 forms and have them sent to us, and she would have my mother send them to me. My mother was furious that we had checked with her friend and called her on her bluff, but true to her word, her friend filed my taxes in FAFSA for me. I offered to pay her, or at least babysit for her, but she said it was okay. I believe she was aware of my mother's mental instability and felt terrible for me and my sister. At this time, I discovered that my mother had not been assisting my sister with tuition, as she said, and my sister had disclosed it to my father, who had confronted her and asked to know where the child support was going. My mother argued that he wasn't giving her enough money, which was why she couldn't assist us. My W-2s were sent home again during my second year of college, and my mother accidentally dumped them in the garbage. I had to ask for duplicate W-2s for my summer employment not once, but twice because she kept tossing them away. I submitted my tax return late that year, and as a consequence my FAFSA was late, so I didn't receive the entire amount I had before. Complain to your father, she said whenever I grumbled about money or a lack of food in the home. So the summer before my third year, I was sick of my mother's nonsense. I was working full-time for the summer and saving as much as I could, but Mom refused to assist me out with food or anything else when I was at home. She was furious because instead of paying the phone bill so she could make long-distance calls to her online buddies and spend all day in chat rooms, back when we had dial-up, I had the guts to get a mobile phone and pay the bill myself. She told everyone I should leave out because I wasn't working hard enough. I was in the honors program, and she would act as a Marta in front of all her friends about how it's so hard when you have kids in college, and they eat you out of house and home and come to you for money. I had saved $1,000 by the end of the summer, but the school wouldn't allow me move into the dorm until I paid 50% up front, which was roughly $10,000. I didn't know what to do since the university had assured me all summer that I was okay, only to tell me on move-in day that I couldn't move into the dorm. In a hurry, I dialed my father's number, and he talked with someone who agreed to give me 24 hours. I moved in, and the following day my father arrived first thing with a coffee and a donut for me, telling me not to worry because he was going to rectify this once and for all. We went from office to office on campus, and he co-signed a loan for me, which he eventually paid off, and then he paid the remainder of my tuition that the loan didn't cover. He then took me out to lunch and told me the truth. My mother never paid for my sister's tuition. My sister had graduated this summer before my junior year of college. My sister eventually corroborated this, although she was unsurprised that my mother had lied. My father co-signed a debt for my sister, which he eventually paid off, and my sister was able to earn a scholarship and do COOP to pay for her final 2 years. He also informed me that my mother was not in such bad shape. As part of the divorce settlement, he was required to pay the mortgage and property taxes on our house, and even though my sister was now on her own, he was still paying her the same amount of child support of about $2,000 per month, despite the fact that I was living on campus for 75% of the year. And my mother had not given me a dime. Just to clarify, my tuition and room and board before financial aid kicked in were $15,000 a year, so she could have easily helped me out with school because after financial aid kicked in, when I was able to get it, the balance was usually $6,000. I was hurt to think my mom was just living off my child support and constantly making me feel guilty for wanting anything or not being able to cater to her every whim. She would get that I wouldn't come home. I remembered how bad she made me feel growing up, how she made me feel worthless when, in fact, she would not have had a roof over her head after the divorce if it hadn't been for me or my sister. He requests that I provide him access to my account so that he can establish that my mother was not paying for college and that I was. He'd inquired how I would feel if he took care of college instead of providing child support to my mother. That sounded fantastic to me. He even informed me that I may spend my breaks at his place rather than my mother's. I contacted my mother and assured her that my father had taken care of the problem and that she had no regrets. She blamed me for not budgeting my finances properly and for squandering my money all summer. I simply pretended to be stupid and claimed she was correct, but I pointed out that I had done what she had directed me to do and complained to my father. My mother contacted me a month later, enraged. My father had communicated with the courts and a hearing in their divorce case was scheduled. My father had shown that my mother had not been paying for my or my sister's college tuition, which was the reason my father was forced to pay child support until I graduated. It didn't make sense to pay her child support when I wasn't living at home for the most of the year, and she only gave me 1 cent. My father informed the court that he would happily pay for me to complete college, but that he would no longer pay my mother child support or the mortgage on the home. If my mother refused to assume the mortgage, they could sell the property and I could live with him during my breaks. My mother was enraged and accused me of being self-centered. I merely informed her that my tuition must be far more than what she received in child support, since she was never able to assist me with school expenses. She just kept throwing guilt trips on me about how I was selfish since she didn't get to go to college straight after high school and never got to enjoy 4 carefree years of college. I reminded her that she hadn't worked since my grandmother died approximately 3 years ago, and that I was working and going to school at the time, while she got to enjoy her life freely. At that moment, she had very well torn me a new one. She attempted to retaliate against my father by failing to pay the utilities on the home, making it seem as though she needed the money. She then informed me that the electricity and water had been turned off, and that if I wanted to return home for winter break, I needed to assist her. She had moved in with her boyfriend at his condo. I just informed her that I would miss her, but that I would spend winter break with my father. She was furious and yelled about how selfish I was for not wanting to spend Christmas with her. As a side note, the Christmas before my gift was spent getting rid of a lot of my personal items. Why? My mom was irritated that I didn't want to come home one weekend to help her clean because I had to take 2 buses, 2 trains, spend $21 one way, and wait for her to remember to pick me up at the train station, which was a whole 20-minute drive for her after I had traveled for 4 to 5 hours because I had finals and I told her I would help clean for the holidays once I returned home for winter break. Her reaction: She grabbed all of my belongings, packed them in boxes, and dumped them on the front yard. Most of my belongings were wrecked by being left out in the rain, and I threw away a majority of them. I assured my mother that I would pay her a visit over my winter vacation once she had the utilities switched on. When I informed my father what was going on, he said he and my stepmother, as well as my half-brother and sister, were overjoyed that I was going to spend winter break with them and that he could get me a job in his office as well. He then contacted my mother to tell her that child support had not been terminated and that they planned to market the property in a few months. So what was this about the utilities being turned off? She was furious, but she somehow found the money to put the lights back on. That spring, my father formally took over my college tuition via the courts, and he even made sure I received my entire financial assistance because he had picked up W-2s for me. My mother was denied child support and was instructed by the court that she needed to participate with the sale of the home and pay the utility bills, among other things, in order for it to sell. Her partner moved in with her until the home was sold and she relocated to a different time zone. What's the actual deal? My father's education expenses were less expensive than her child support. To recapitulate, my mother mistreated and exploited me, and I exacted my vengeance by forcing her to lose her child support and free rent by doing what she had taught me for years. Complaining to my father, there are no regrets. Edit, there have been so many comments and upvotes. Thanks. Some of you have inquired as to whether or not things have improved. It all depends on what you mean. I'm not as close to her as I'm to my father and stepmother, whom I got closer to after college and continue to be close to this day, but I still have a connection with her. We chat, but I've learned not to trust her because she will let me down. For example, we were supposed to meet for my birthday a couple of years ago, but she didn't show up. When I arrange birthdays or holidays, I no longer involve her at all. And others have inquired as to how she handled us as children. She wasn't perfect, but she had a lot of horrible times. Granted, I've met a lot of individuals who have had it worse, so I try to keep that in mind. She was attempting to play the same sympathy cards she had while I was in school after college. This time, Mom was attempting to persuade me to relocate from New Jersey to Tennessee. She had relocated to a different time zone before my senior year of college and had not informed me or my sister. She simply flew away. I loved the neighborhood and told her I'd look for work and considered taking her up on her offer to stay in her guest room temporarily. She immediately began laying on the guilt trip, and I hung up. She then complained to my sister about how I have a daughter who doesn't want to take care of me. That makes my sister and I both chuckle. She wasn't quite 50 years old, was in wonderful health, and refused to work. I had no intention of moving in and caring for her. She spent the most of my adult life in and out of mental institutions, attempting to persuade us that we either wanted to live with her or that she wanted to live with us. She moved into my grandparents' old home in Philadelphia. They died years ago. She didn't keep up with the repairs and had to sell it for less than she thought it was worth, wound up staying in various relatives' guest rooms and making excuses not to work, and eventually wore out her welcome at so many people's houses that she ended up in the hospital, then in a shelter, and now lives in subsidized housing. It's a nice loft-style apartment, but guess what? She still whines about how horrible her situation is and how no one wants to take her in. Lol. Thank you everybody again for your wonderful remarks, upvotes, and messages. I know I grew raised in a less than ideal environment, but I often remind myself that many others have had it far worse. I at least had my father and my sister. And that going through something like that has helped me to be strong and self-reliant.